Welcome to the Draw Shop's Get Genius podcast, where we talk to today's business influencers to pick their brain and pull out their genius. It's time to get genius.
To become more successful, you don't have to change who you are. You have to become more of who you are. Hello, listeners. That is a quote by our guest today, Sally Hogshead. How often do we think that we need to change or become better at something when really we just have to become more of our essence? A lot of times people have difficulty knowing what that essence is, even knowing if they have any kind of essence that empowers them, that actually draws people to them and is actually that thing that makes them so good at what they do. And today we're going to talk about that. That quality is the fascinating quality about you. Today's guest, Sally, skyrocketed to the top of the advertising profession in her early 20s, and by the age of 24, she was the most award-winning advertising copywriter in the U.S. Her campaigns for brands such as Mini Cooper, Nike, Godiva, and Coca-Cola have fascinated millions of consumers. And at the age of 27, she opened her first ad agency, and her work still hangs in the Smithsonian Museum of American History. So, drawing upon this remarkable branding legacy, Sally developed the Fascination Advantage, which was the first algorithm to measure personal brands. And she's taking it even further now to measure people. And unlike the traditional personality assessments such as Myers-Briggs or StrengthsFinders, Sally's test doesn't measure how you see the world, but how the world sees you. So let that sink in a little bit because it's so important. Sally frequently appears in national media, including NBC's Today Show and the New York Times. She is named as the #1 brand guru in the world. And her practical marketing system now lives inside organizations such as IBM, Twitter, and the YMCA, as well as thousands of other small businesses. This science of fascination that she created is based on her decade of research with dozens of Fortune 500 teams, hundreds of small businesses, and over 1,000 C-level executives. She's got a book called Fascinate, How to Make Your Brand Impossible to Resist, and it is a New York Times bestseller. And Sally is one of only 172 living members of the Speaker Hall of Fame. And if you don't know what that is, it's the global speaking industry's highest award for professional excellence. I first saw Sally a few years ago and I was immediately fascinated. And it turns out that is what she teaches and gives. And you will find out during the interview how you can take your own fascination personality assessment and find out what it is that people see in you. And I would encourage you also to take part in a really cool contest that we are doing with the How to Fascinate team. The Draw Shop and the How to Fascinate team have teamed up to put this contest together to encourage you and actually dare you to tag somebody who you think is fascinating, and also to find out what it is that's fascinating about you. So the contest is Dare to Fascinate, #Dare to Fascinate, and we'll have some more guidelines during the interview on how you can participate. And I will tell you there are over $2,000 worth of prizes involved, and I think you're going to love, if anything, taking that assessment. And I hope that you see the value too in calling someone out on what makes them fascinating. So head on over to our blog. You'll also see this in the show notes, and you will see all of the rules and the guidelines to joining the contest, and we will pick a winner You will get your assessment code to be able to take the free assessment. I can tell you now, you will be going to howtofascinate.com/YOU, and you will enter TDS, short for the draw shop, TDS, when it asks for an assessment code, and that's where you will take the 28 questions to find out how others perceive you. And again, if you go to our blog post, you will also see some ready-made tweets for you. So the whole contest is taking place on Twitter. You can just copy and paste them and fill in the blank of who you fascinate with. And make sure that you hashtag dare to fascinate and tag at Sally Hogshead and tag at the draw shop. And we'll talk about that during the interview. All of this will be in the show notes and in the blog, and listen away. You are going to love Sally. Sally, I'm so excited you're on the show today.
Oh, Summer, I'm psyched to be able to be here.
I first saw you in Denver actually speak. This was maybe 2 to 3 years ago. And you were at an event and you did a shot of Jaeger on stage.
It was kind of worse than that. It was like 8:30 a.m.
Yes.
And I was describing how Jägermeister is the perfect example of a brand that differentiates itself not by being better, but by staking a claim on being different. And I said to the audience, who's never done a Jägermeister shot? And somebody, Tamara, who's probably a mutual friend of ours, who I hadn't met at the time, she raised her hand. And so there in the audience, she did a Jägermeister shot with us, proving that Jägermeister doesn't win on the basis of taste. It wins on the basis of carving out a toxic experience.
Yes. Oh my gosh. And I think that what we're going to be talking about today is going to go into that deeper. And it's just awesome. It totally changed my perspective and how I thought of advertising and marketing and brands. So thank you for that. And now I get to, then I met you.
We'll clink our shot glasses.
Exactly.
Not a toxic experience today.
Yes. Then I got to meet you through various different groups and networks and events, and you were every bit as awesome as I saw you on stage. And I was it's going back to when you just first walked on the stage, I was immediately fascinated. Little did I know that was going to be what your whole presentation was about. And come to learn that you are just this advertising and marketing genius. I would love for our listeners to hear a bit of your background and how you came to discover why fascination was so important.
Sure. Well, why don't we talk about it from a marketing and advertising perspective? Because that's the perfect parallel to be able to understand what makes you as an individual fascinating is by taking some brands that we're familiar with and understanding what makes them fascinating. When I first started in advertising, I loved working with brands that didn't have the biggest budget because they had to be more scrappy. They were almost like the underdog brands. And so they knew that because they didn't have the biggest budget, they had to create awareness and excitement and talk value by doing something that was either going to be outrageous or it was going to be so memorable that they could get in front of people once and make a strong first impression. And the lesson that I learned from that is that for all of us, we have a choice. We can either have the biggest budget or we can be the most fascinating. When I worked with really big clients like BMW and Coca-Cola and Target, they did have the biggest budget. And so for them, the focus was about how do they have the biggest media buy. But for most of us, we don't have the biggest budget, or we're not the most fascinating, or we're not already the leading expert or leading authority. And so we need to find a way to stand out by being the most fascinating. And when I was 27 years old, I had already worked on these huge brands, and I decided that I wanted to open up my own agency and in Venice Beach, California. And I opened up in Venice because it was the only place that I could afford real estate at the time. At the time, Venice was still very much Venice, and it was gang zone, and we would have conference calls. Could literally hear gang fire out the door. And the client on the conference call, I remember one time they were like, is someone slamming the door or is a car backfiring? No, never mind that. But the lesson that I really saw was in the choice between, are you going to have the biggest budget or be the most fascinating? You really have to commit to one or the other. And in this case, I definitely didn't have the biggest budget. And so I focused on the fact that the agency was located in this gang-riddled area that it was literally dangerous for people to come visit. And so the new business mailer that I sent out to prospective clients was a paper hanger they could put on their rear view mirror when they visited. And it said, "Please don't slash my tires. I'm visiting the agency." And please don't slash my tires. I'm visiting the agency. And then on the backside, it said, "We can always meet in your neighborhood." So what I was saying immediately in sending this out to prospective clients was, if what you want are expensive, glossy production of ideas, if you want the ferns and brass and marble washrooms, you're not going to get it here. But you will get courageous ideas that we're going to fight tooth and nail for you. And that was my real epiphany, that we can't be all things to all people. We can't be a commodity. Just as a brand can't be a commodity unless it has this huge budget. It's crucial for us, whether we're a small business or an entrepreneur, or us as individuals, for us to find ways that we can stand out and make a difference. But in order to identify how we're most likely to stand out, we have to be able to see ourselves through the eyes of others. In other words, we can't just look at how do we see the world? We have to understand, how does the world see us? How does the world see me as being different and impressive and influential compared to other people? And then once you know that, it becomes really easy for you to focus on that and just do more of what you're already doing right.
So how does someone go about finding out what is fascinating about themselves? How do they get someone to pay attention to them?
Yeah. Fascination is an intense focus. And I first began studying the science behind this, but the science behind how do you get other people to pay attention, but more importantly, how do you keep their attention so that you can build a relationship? I began studying it in 2006 when I found a sentence in a book that said, "Fascination is one of the oldest words in written language. It's from ancient Latin. The word is fascinare, and fascinare means to bewitch or hold captive, so your listener is powerless to resist." And when I first saw that, I had just come off of a career of creating television commercials and print ads, and I thought, well, instead of asking for attention, what if we could fascinate people so that we were bewitching them, holding them captive? And I began looking at this, deconstructing it as a science. And what I found is that all of us have certain qualities that make us most impressive to other people, most likely to make a positive impression, most likely to be able to show up and perform at our best. But the problem is, if we don't know how other people see us, then we're going to start to dumb ourselves down, to water ourselves down, to become a commodity. So I created an algorithm based on branding, based on focus groups, that measure personality and an individual in the exact same way that a focus group would measure what makes a brand fascinating. So, for example, using some of my clients, what makes Nike fascinating is that it delivers athletic empowerment. That's what focus groups say. That's what makes Nike different than its competitors. What makes Coca-Cola different than Pepsi is that it delivers delightful refreshment. What makes Southwest Airlines different is it delivers friendly practicality. And when you can distill a brand down to its essence, to these to the core words that demonstrate its most powerful point of differentiation, it becomes easy for the brand to build itself around that point. And I thought, well, what if we could do that for people? What if we could literally assign people ways that they're fascinating, allow them to focus on that, just like Coke does and Nike does. But if individuals could do that. So for me, what differentiates me is fascinating communication. What differentiates other people might be meticulous analysis, or ambitious goals, or friendly relationships. And once you know that, it becomes easy for you to build your marketing copy, but also to build your brand.
A lot of people would say, there's nothing fascinating about me. What do you say to that?
You know what? Most people think they're not fascinating. In fact, let me ask you a question, Summer. Would you say that you're a better driver than the average person?
Yes.
Almost everybody thinks they're a better driver than the average person. 80% And you probably are. 80% of people think they're a better driver than the average person. So people wildly overestimate their ability to drive, but they wildly underestimate their ability to fascinate. I found in my research only 39% of people think they are more fascinating than the average person. In other words, most people think they're not fascinating. And here's the problem with that. If you don't think you're fascinating, you think your message doesn't matter. If you don't think you're fascinating, you're not going to play big. You're not going to make a difference. You're not going to put yourself out there. You're not going to go for the big job interview. You're not going to make the big pitch. You're not going to be completely engaged with your listener and with your audience. And you're going to shrink to the back of the room, either literally or metaphorically. You're going to start to play on a smaller playing field. And when people play small, they lose and the world loses. And so what I'm committed for 2017 is to show 1 million people what makes them fascinating so they can play bigger, so they can go for bigger results, so they can be more engaged. Nobody needs this more than entrepreneurs and people whose butts are on the line to be able to create huge results, not just for their clients and customers and their teams, but for themselves to make sure that that they make a difference in the world and that the world is different as a result of them being part of it.
Absolutely. So how are you going about making that impact?
When I originally created the Fascination Advantage, the assessment that measures what makes you fascinating, I thought of it as a business tool. And I thought of it as how do you make more money for your clients? How do you get the job of your dreams? How do you impress the media? And what I've realized over the last couple of years, on a personal note, is while that's valid, it doesn't really serve what the world needs right now. There's a conversation that's happening in the world right now that a lot of people feel restricted. A lot of people feel a lot of self-criticism. They feel fear, and they're stopping themselves. And I especially see this in women and kids, that for a lot of different factors, people feel like they're judging themselves because other people are judging them. And when we've done research with women, one of the things we find is women score themselves very, very low on their ability to make a positive first impression and to have an influential conversation. They score far lower than men on self-reporting how the results of their communication. And that totally bums me out. And it doesn't surprise me. I had a women's studies minor from Duke University, and I went and lived with an African tribe in a goat dung hut, trying to understand why women become empowered or not in a society. And so about a year ago, I started seeing, I love what my business is doing, but it's really not the highest and best value of what we should be doing with these tools. And so I over the last year, speaking entrepreneur to entrepreneur, I've been focusing on, if we can show people who don't feel empowered, if we can show them exactly how they're most likely to add value, and they can simply do more of that and not try to fix themselves, not criticize themselves, but just do more of what they're already doing right, then we can start to see a difference, not just in the workplace, but within families. When a woman doesn't feel empowered in a relationship, then she's not going to be as likely to bring her best to the relationship or stand up for herself. When a girl doesn't feel empowered in her class, she's not going to raise her hand or go for those extra studies. As in the business world, so often what we're seeing happening is women are leaving at the mid-level because they feel like they're getting a message that they're not scoring high enough. There's a focus on their weaknesses instead of their strengths. So I'm going to shift that conversation. It's not about your strengths. It's about your differences. What makes you different than other people? It's not about changing who you are. It's about being more of who you are. It's not about figuring out what you need to do to be better than other people. It's about identifying what you're already doing right and then doing it strategically on purpose.
That is so beautiful and so, so powerful, because everybody is they're comparing themselves. And like you said, especially women comparing themselves to other women when they feel that they're not good at something and they keep trying to get better at it and they're not, then they feel so disempowered. So I think it's so brilliant, and people often, it's almost like you can't see it because you're doing it every day. You don't realize what's so wonderful about you and how other people see you. So I'm just so excited that you're doing this, but keep going and tell us more.
One of the things we learned, at this point, I've measured 1 million people. And I'm not a researcher, so I don't look at things through the lens of psychology or science. I look at things through the lens of branding. But I want to be able to find the contradictions. One of the contradictions that we found is that if you say to a woman, we asked women, we asked 1,000 women in a random sample around the United States, if you could be guaranteed that you'd be the most fascinating woman in the room, how much would you be willing to pay? And the answer was women are willing to pay more to be fascinating than they pay for food and clothes combined.
Wow.
Women are willing to pay 15% of their take-home revenue after taxes. And so here's the implication of that. For women, we're relationship oriented. We have it's crucial for us to feel like we have an authentic voice, that we can contribute, that we can be connected. And when women feel marginalized or disenfranchised, go back in the corner and finish that spreadsheet and let me know when you're done. Mm-hmm. Then we exit. And so as an entrepreneur, that first of all, the lesson is it's crucial for you to be able to communicate and connect with your clients and customers and your community in a way that allows you to show up every day based on the qualities that make you uniquely you, instead of trying to copy what somebody else is doing. The other lesson is, if you're selling something to women, don't just focus on you being fascinating. Help women feel empowered through the use of your product or your service. For example, if you're a financial advisor, make sure that it's not just about you putting numbers in front of a woman. Make sure that she understands what she can be doing with this to forward her life and her communication and her relationships.
Right. How did you have a personality test, a fascination personality test. How did you put this together? What kind of research did that entail to put this together and give such incredibly accurate results? I mean, when you take this test, you're like, wow, how did she know me?
Well, first of all, let's take a look at what makes you fascinating. So can I use you as an example?
Absolutely.
When you did the Fascination Advantage assessment, we learned that you are an orchestrator. That means that you orchestrate big things. You guide people. You show them what to do. It's a combination of being highly engaged and emotional and passionate, but also being very constructive and practical with having an outcome. And when we look at your business, when we look at the Draw Shop and the other businesses that you're involved in, it's really clear how your role as an orchestrator allows you to bring people together and then get them to focus on a specific result. Yes?
Yes, totally.
Now imagine. So if I said, Summer, listen, don't get people really emotionally involved. Just kind of send them an Excel document and then calculate that and come back with a number. What would that feel like for you?
It's horrible. Draining.
It would shut you down, right?
Totally.
Yeah. But for other people, that would feel like that's their calling. That would be enlivening for them. So I wanted to measure this. I wanted to understand, what are the qualities that allow somebody to show up at their best every single time consistently, whether they're about to give a speech or giving a presentation. And so I wanted to understand, how do we measure people in the same way that we measure brands? One of my clients, Twitter doesn't care how Twitter sees its audience. Twitter cares how the audience sees Twitter. And in the same way, when you write a Twitter bio, how do other people perceive those words that you're using, the actual nouns and adjectives that you're using to describe yourself? And so I drew upon my advertising background, and I created an algorithm. And I first published the algorithm in 2009. And what I found over the course of measuring this group of 1 million professionals is that when you give somebody 3 adjectives that describe who they are at their best and how they're most likely to make the most positive first impression, then they can just kind of use my words, draw upon that, build upon that, and create their marketing around it.
I love that. So Sally, you have a project right now called You Are Fascinating. And I'd love to hear a bit more about the mission behind this and how our listeners can actually participate in that and find out what's fascinating about them. Do we have a place that we can send them to do this?
people can find out what makes them fascinating and show other people what they see as fascinating about other people by going here. You go to howtofascinate.com/you, Y-O-U, howtofascinate.com/you. And then it's going to ask you for your assessment code. And so this is like the Draw Shop's free backstage pass. The code is TDS, like the Draw Shop, no spaces, TDS. And then you answer 28 questions. And the questions are going to be asking you not about yourself, but about how other people see you. And at the end, you get a report that will give you the adjectives that you can use to describe yourself. But here's how I recommend people use it. Take the assessment and think about yourself and think about how does it feel when somebody identifies those qualities within you that are most captivating. And then think about other people in your life. What do you find that's fascinating about other people? And then go find those people, find a photo of them, find a photo of anybody from Richard Branson to your grandparents. Post it on Twitter, and the hashtag that they can use to post it is Dare to Fascinate. So hashtag Dare to Fascinate, all one word. And what we're starting to see is that people are identifying all different types of people that make them fascinated. And you can pay the assessment forward. You can post the assessment itself on Twitter, post it on Facebook, share the links from the Facebook page at the Draw Shop, and find out within your community, within your coworkers and your friends, what makes them fascinating.
And we'll be sure to have the exact link and the code and everything on the blog post along with this and in the show notes, so you won't miss out on that. So this is such a fabulous tool, but I have to say, it takes some courage to look at yourself that way. Mm-hmm. And so, which is why, it is that we are asking you to dare to fascinate, because it's hard to look at ourselves that way. Sadly enough, people feel guilty, or they feel like they're being arrogant, conceited when they're talking about this way. But can you help us shift that perspective?
Yes. I'll give you an example. When I was in the 5th grade, I was driving in a car with my dad. He's a retired orthopedic surgeon, and we were driving on the way to the hospital to do his rounds, and we got in a horrible car accident. A tow truck slammed into my door, and the car wrapped around a telephone pole, and my dad had to pull me out of the car, and I was unconscious for who knows how long, and he gave me CPR, and I woke up on the operating room table and then was in a coma, and I recovered. My brain recovered, but it took about a year for me to be able to get the nerves reconnected in my face so that I could have facial expression. And over the course of that time, for about 6 months, I couldn't smile. And when I tried to smile, it looked like a grimace. It was like a contortion. And that cut me off from myself, because it was like my primary mode of communication, which was smiling and creating kind of that back and forth unconscious neurological response that we have with other human beings, where we smile and they smile back, and then we smile, and then suddenly there's a bond there. That was taken away. And I found that was a lot more crippling than anything else that happened from the accident, because during that time, I just became reclusive. When I couldn't use the part of myself, when I couldn't access and express the part of myself that was so core fundamentally to who I am and how I relate to other people, it shut me down. And I didn't want to socialize. And it was that during that period of time that I started as a 5th grader to realize when we're cut off from the parts of ourselves that define who we are at our best, then it's paralyzing. And I remembered this when later on when I went into advertising and I started watching what happens when a brand tries to look and sound like its competitors, the brand dies. As individuals, this happens to us over and over again, when we have to be able to go into a presentation. If we can't communicate ourselves, if we can't use those qualities that we have, it's not just disempowering. We kill ourselves off. So it takes courage to be able to identify what makes you fascinating. But if you don't do that, then the world is going to suffer, because the world doesn't get to be able to have that part of you, but you're cutting off your potential and your success. When we measure people, what we find is the greatest way to empower someone is to show them their highest value. how they're most likely to stand out and have a specialty. And that's the purpose behind showing people how and why to dare to fascinate.
So I noticed this, and as you're talking about this, I think we've all been there where we have those feelings inside, that kind of extra boost of confidence, or you're just kind of in the zone, the way that you're interacting with people, and you can feel it, the way that people are drawn to you, and the way that they're like attracted to you, and they're smiling, and things just feel a little bit brighter. And I've noticed as you're talking about this is, well, those are those fascinating qualities about me. And really being in tune with those allows you to have more of a connection with other people, which, as you know, as an entrepreneur, as a parent, as a wife, it's in everything that you do, connection is so important.
Yeah, and connection between yourself and your work. You know what it's like, Summer. You know when you're working on a project and you don't even notice the time going by, and you're having breakthroughs. It's like you're in the zone. It's sort of like when an athlete is performing at their ultimate level. That's that feeling when you're in a state of flow, when you're in a state of fascination. When you feel fascinated by your work, or when you're fascinated by a conversation that you're having with a friend over lunch, or you're fascinated with a TV show, then in that time, your brain's operating at its optimal performance. So it's really important for us as professionals, especially as anybody who's leading a business, for you to be able to come into work and to know how you're most likely to get quickly into that zone. Those are your well springs. For you and I, it's probably creative building, creative brainstorming. What would it be for you, Summer? What are those things that when you come into work that for you it feels like a space of joy?
To me, it's an immediate connection with someone when I first notice something about them, which is interesting with this, dare to fascinate. When there's a saying about treat somebody as if they are the light that you see within them. Treat them as if that's all that you can see. And I've noticed, just, in my career of being a human, everybody has light. Even when they think they don't, you can see there's times where you just get into these conversations and all of a sudden it comes out and there's that light within them. So for me, it's about seeing that with other people. And when we talk about being the orchestrator, it's let's bring everybody in all of their, best talents and whatever it is that makes them fascinating, and let's all come together. And it lifts the energy. So I don't know if that's an exact answer, but that's kind of that feeling. It's just you can immediately change the mood of a room by coming in, for me, and recognizing the light in somebody else, rather than coming in going, oh my gosh, how do I look right now? What are they going to say? I don't know what to do. If that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely. When we did a study of high performers inside of companies like AT&T and small businesses and GE. And what we found is the high performers have a specialty. There's something that they can contribute that allows them to add extraordinary value. And that when they can get in that mode, just like you're talking about right now, Summer, when they can get in that mode, they feel more confident, but they're perceived as being a higher performer. So that's part of what people, when people understand what makes them fascinating. In other words, when they take the Fascination Advantage assessment and get their result, it tells them the qualities that they can be consciously applying when they're getting in front of other people and they want to be able to connect. On the other side, when people feel inhibited, then when you get self-conscious, when you shut down, other people do. Here's an example. Summer, have you ever been in a presentation and suddenly it goes south? Like you can watch you watch the chief marketing officer's arms cross, or somebody makes a point, or you notice a typo in your spelling. What happens in that moment is that your brain releases a blast of epinephrine. So neurologically, you begin shutting down. Your mouth dries up. Your body language changes. And your listener, whether they realize it or not, unconsciously, they start feeling awkward. They start backing away. They want to disengage. It's not fun talking to somebody when they're in a state of insecurity, self-doubt. So the key is, how are you most likely to be confident, but in the eyes of others? And once you can do that, that's when you can win the pitch or make a message that communicates with your audience, so they listen and they remember. This is a key of this, a key of why you need to dare to fascinate. It doesn't matter if you have the best message if nobody notices or cares. It doesn't matter if you have the best service if nobody uses it. It doesn't matter if you have the best product if nobody buys it. It's your job. It's your job as a communicator to make sure that your listener is hearing, remembering, and taking action on what you're saying. Because being the best isn't enough anymore in a distracted world. Being the best isn't enough if nobody notices or cares.
So let's kind of take that into the communities that we build, our audience that we build as entrepreneurs, and also the relationships that we make, because we both know the relationship with your community and the relationship with your strategic partners or your team members or anybody in your circle is so critical to being powerful, to having that, effect that you want to have. How do we take this, what we learn about ourselves and what's fascinating about ourselves, to really strengthen those relationships and our connection and communication with our community?
That's a great question. Here are a few recommendations. First thing is, after you take the assessment and you get your report, take a look at the descriptors of how you are most likely to fascinate other people. For you, the descriptors are you're attentive, you're dedicated, and you're efficient. That's what we learned when you did the Fascination Advantage assessment. You're most likely to add the most value when you, Summer, are being attentive, dedicated, and efficient. So think to yourself, what are times that you've succeeded in the past by being attentive, dedicated, and efficient? What are ways that you could consciously do that? Should you be promising that in your proposals? I'm going to be attentive to your needs. I'm going to be dedicated to your team. I'm going to be creative, but I'm going to be efficient in making sure that actually gets executed. Then sit down with your team. Have everybody do the Fascination Advantage assessment and come together. Do a lunch and learn. Do a half day offsite and take a look at what are the qualities that each person has, so that you can understand what are the qualities that differentiate each person. So you're not just trying to replicate each other. You're optimizing each other. And then the last step is to be able to share this out to the community. Remember, a moment ago we were saying, the greatest way to empower somebody is to show them what makes them fascinating. So post it on Facebook, but post the draw shop, Dare to Fascinate, on your Facebook page. Invite people to do the assessment, and then ask them, who do they find fascinating, so that they can pay it forward, that they can find out about themselves and also about their own community.
This is so fabulous, and there's so many takeaways here, and I think it's an excellent tool, especially when learning about your team that you're working with. By the way, I mean to really understand, you might think that but to have them take the personality test, it's incredible. But Sally, before we sign off, I would love to know, who is a person that you are fascinated by?
I am fascinated by a man named Joe Polish. Summer, I happen to know that you know Joe Polish too, right?
Yes, very well.
Yes. Yeah. In fact, Joe Polish runs a mastermind group named the Genius Network that you and I are both part of. And the reason why Joe fascinates me is because he has this insatiable ability to build connections with people, not just between him and the person like Tony Robbins or Richard Branson, but he has the ability to create connections among people. That's not something that naturally comes to me as an advantage. So I can stand back and watch Joe do this and create scenarios in which people show up and totally fully self-express themselves and create these meaningful connections that seem to materialize out of thin air. I really admire that. Joe's advantages from the Fascination Advantage assessment are prestige, meaning he easily earns respect, and innovation, meaning he changes the game with creativity. So Joe's advantages are that he's original, enterprising, and forward-thinking. That's an awesome combination for somebody in that role. I also noticed that Joe surrounds himself with people who are not just focused on creativity, people who are great at execution and implementation. So he's one of my favorite people that not just fascinates me personally, but also in my work.
And I would just add on to that is that he knows this about himself, which is a really, really good thing. Yes, yeah. Exactly.
Well, he dares to fascinate.
That's right. So, Sally, this has been so wonderful and definitely fascinating. Thank you so much for being on the show, and I'm so excited to see those tweets come in to hear who our listeners think is fascinating. And remember, dare to fascinate. Thank you, Sally.
Thank you, Summer.
Thank you for listening to today's Get Genius. You can learn more about The Draw Shop at www.thedrawshop.com, on Facebook, LinkedIn, and Twitter. Your home for kick-butt custom whiteboard marketing videos. Your ideas come to life. Thanks for listening. Please share, comment, and make any suggestions for future Genius guests.